Boris Timanovsky.
Thank you. Last summer, after 16 years of absence, I went to the city in Russia where I grew up. I went there in company business, and I was bringing with me a suitcase filled with second-hand clothes that my mom asked me to distribute among her relatives there. I was really the first in my family to go back there after all those years. She also gave me a hand-drawn map showing the location of my grandfather's grave at the local cemetery, and she asked me to go there. And when I was leaving, she asked me again, "Are you going to go there?" "Yes." "Promise?" "Promise." It was really important for her that I go there. My grandfather died when I was little, and she wanted me to remember him. She would tell me stories about him. I guess it was all a part of dealing with the loss. He was still very much alive in her mind, and she wanted him to continue to live in my mind too. But I was just too little when it all happened, so I didn't remember much. So I thought maybe this visit to his grave at the cemetery for her would make things up, would make up for what she thought was her loss, her failure in keeping his memory alive. So I promised that the first thing I do when I get there would be go to the cemetery. Well, the first thing I did when I got there was locate my high school girlfriend. And I got caught up in work, and I had a lot of catching up to do with my childhood friends. So it wasn't until a day before I was leaving that I actually found time to go to the cemetery. And it was late in the afternoon, and right by the entrance there was a woman who was selling flowers. And by then she only had 7 carnations left in her bucket. And I bought them all, but when I reached for my wallet, I realized I didn't have the map with me. I had no idea what happened to that map, and I had no idea where my grandfather's grave was located. I could call my mom and ask her. There was a payphone right there, and I still had 10 or 15 minutes left on my calling card, and it was already morning in New York. But the problem was I had already told her that I went to the cemetery. And really, you know, what was I going to say? That I decided to go again but lost the map. She knows who she's dealing with. She should see right through it. So I thought I'd find some help, and I went to look for the main office. And I found the main office, and it was actually in the middle of the cemetery, and it occupied an actual family mausoleum. So I figured some affluent family must have commissioned it for themselves, but then maybe immigrated to the United States, so the management took advantage of the opportunity and moved right in. And fortunately for me, it was open, and inside was a small office filled with file cabinets. It kind of looked like a financial aid office at some community college. And behind the counter was an old woman. She was reading, and she said, yes, she'd help me locate my grandfather's records. And she started looking in those file cabinets, and she was doing everything so slowly. I knew it was going to take forever. And then the back room door opened, and a little boy walked in, an 8-year-old, I think. And he said, "Grandma, I don't want to play anymore. Let's go home." And I could see through the door that there was a computer in the back room with Pac-Man or something like that on the screen. And she says, "Do Grandma a favor. Go do a grave identification search. The name is Abraham Pekarsky." And the boy says, "Yeah. Should I look in the mass graves too?" And she turns to me and she says, "Did you say he died in the war?" "No, he died in the early 70s. So the boy went back inside, and a couple of minutes later, he comes back with a printout. And I was going to reach for it, but the boy's grandmother says, no, let me see it first. It's $5 per grave." And I say, "Well, is there more than one?" She says, "Yes, there's always more than one." So it turned out there were 17 Abraham Pekarskys on the list, and I paid for 2. The two who died in the early 70s and whose age, I believe, closely matched my grandfather's. And I went to look for them. I was hoping that at least one of them would have a portrait on the tombstone. At least it is the custom with the Russian immigrants here in New York to put portraits on tombstones. So I thought, this way I'll know which grave is mine. And I was walking through the cemetery, and lots of tombstones had portraits on them, and I was looking at the faces, and I was thinking that the faces I saw there didn't look quite as happy as the faces that I see on our Russian tombstones here in Brooklyn. So I thought that maybe to have immigrated wasn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe all those immigrants did find that happiness the day that they went after. So I found the first grave, and it said Abraham Pekarsky on it, but there was no portrait. There was an inscription from the loving wife and children. I had no idea whether this was the right one or not, so I went to look for the other one. I found it too, and that one was virtually indistinguishable from the first one. Even the granite was of the same color. It said Abraham Pekarsky, no portrait. The inscription was slightly different. It said from the grieving family. So I had really no idea what to do. Was my family the loving one or the grieving one? I was standing there, and I was waiting. I was thinking maybe some sort of a special feeling would come to me. I thought maybe I'd feel some sort of a kinship with the person who was laying there. But I just kept wondering whether this wasn't a total stranger who was buried there. I tried to remember all I knew about my grandfather. He was a locksmith. He was a father of three. One of them died in the war. He was a soccer fan. He died from a heart attack. Who was this Abraham Pekarsky? A dentist? An auto accident victim? I really didn't know. I put 3 carnations on that grave, and I went back to the first one. I stood there too for a while, and again I was hoping that I'd feel something special, but it was getting late, and I remembered that I had yet to pack for the trip back to New York. So I put 3 more carnations. Well, I put 3 carnations on this grave, and I stood there with the last flower in my hands, and I didn't really know what to do with that one. Which Abraham Pekarsky should it go to? Should I just get rid of it? Should I take a flower from another grave maybe and make sure that each Abraham Pekarsky gets the equal number of flowers? I couldn't leave. I had to come up with some sort of a formula. And then suddenly I knew what to do. I put that flower on that same grave where I was standing. I thought, if this is really my grandfather who's laying there, then all is well and good, and he got the most. But if not, then let this be a consolation to the stranger, because it wasn't his, but somebody else's grandson who came all the way from America to pay his respect. And I left. I went to the hotel, and I never found that map again. I flew back to New York the next day. Mom and Dad picked me up at the airport. They have this thing about picking me up at airports. Really, I would have been home at least an hour sooner if it wasn't for them. First they couldn't find the parking. Then they went to look for me at the wrong terminal. Then they lost each other. Finally, I found them. And on the way home from the airport in the car, my mom started crying. And I asked, Mom, why are you crying? It's only been a week. And she says, I'm just so happy that you took the time to visit your grandfather's grave. It really means so much to me. I appreciate it. You know, when you called and told me you went there, I thought you were just saying it to make me feel good. But this morning, when I was still in the air, her second cousin, who still lives in Russia, called her and told her that she had just come from the cemetery and that she saw my flowers there. So my mom really knew that I went there. And she stopped crying, and she was sitting there and she was wiping her eyes. And I was thinking, should I ask her how many flowers her second cousin saw? 3 or 4. But then decided that maybe I should just not say anything at all. Thank you.
Boris Timanovsky.